Hello. Hello, I'm Ken Kocienda, and I want to talk to you about how the path isn't straight when you're designing and coding and building things like you just were. The path isn't straight. When you want to take those ideas, designing, coding, and building, and use this, STEAM. You know what STEAM is? What it stands for, some of the things? Yeah, you do, right? It's science and technology and engineering and arts and math. How many of you like one or more of those? Pretty much. I mean, I understand that. That's why you're here today, right? I happen to like all of them, and I used all of them in my 15 years. I worked at Apple on products like the iPad and the Apple Watch and the Safari web browser and the iPhone. And you know who this guy is here? Steve Jobs. He used to be the CEO. He used to be in charge of Apple, leading us as we made products like the iPhone. And I worked on the original iPhone. And my job was to take your thumb taps or your finger taps and figure out what you meant to type. So you've typed on a smartphone, right? Sometimes you don't get exactly what you want, but the software helps you out, right? You get these little hints, and it fixes up your typing. Hopefully it does it well. Well, I wrote the software for that for the first iPhone years ago. That was my job. And now that's what I did as a grown-up. But a long time ago, of course, I was your age, right? Back when the world was in black and white. That's how long ago it was. That's me in the backyard of the house that I grew up in, right? So somehow, in between then and now, right, I figured out how to do sorts of projects that you were doing and have those projects go out into the world. But I'll tell you, sometimes, as a matter of fact, a lot of the time, it was confusing. Now you understand that, right? You were just doing a project. Did you understand every step of the way? No, right? It can sometimes be confusing, especially when you try new things. You're trying to invent new things, trying to put some pieces together and make them work. It can be confusing a lot. And that's true for me too. You know, and it even started back then, you know, kind of confusing. Sometimes even, you know, it can be confusing to dress yourself in the morning, right? Kind of get all the right clothes in the right place. Well, one day, when I was about your age, we had a funny costume contest in my school. But as confusing as that outfit is, it's kind of sometimes you have that same feeling when you're trying to do STEAM projects. That's just the way that it is. So you're sitting out there going, well, I don't know. A lot of the time, you're trying to do your project and you don't know. That's how I felt a lot of the time. And that's, yeah, probably how a lot of you feel as well, a lot of the time. That is okay. It's one of the main messages I want to send you today. That's okay. And you know, and you ask yourself, well, if you're looking ahead and maybe you want to do the kinds of projects that you were doing today, when you get older, right? Is there a secret that will help you get there? I'm not so sure that there is. There's maybe one good piece of advice, which is get into a great college. And then if you get into a great college, you get a great job. And maybe, you know, I thought about that, and I thought that it was going to be easy. That I was going to go straight from this, get a diploma after getting out of college, and my next step was going to be, oh man, I'm going to have a great job, I'm going to make a lot of money, I'm going to have so much money I can light my cigars with $100 bills. But you know what? It didn't work out that way. It didn't at all. Right? You think sometimes that, well, you know, if I work hard and I concentrate, you know, that it's going to be a straight line between where you are now and where you end up. But you know what? In my life, it turned out more like this. There there was lots of going back and forth, and again, lots of confusion, lots of not really being sure of what I was doing. And again, that's all okay. The path isn't straight from where you are to where maybe you're going to end up as you get older, right? Path isn't straight to get from your age to where you've done projects that people out in the world know about and have used. Path wasn't straight. And here's an example of how exactly the path wasn't straight. Now, how many of you were born someplace else other than right around here in California, right? You were born someplace else, right? Now, how many of you were your parents born someplace else, right? Now, I bet all of you and all of your parents have a story about how you wound up here. And I'll bet the path wasn't straight. It wasn't just a simple story, one thing after another, right? That's just how it is. Now, for me, I was born in New York, that little town called West Islip. And yet, you know, that work that I did at Apple on the iPhone was in Cupertino, not far from here. You know, and when you go into Google Earth, how many of you use Google Earth, right? You can make these animations and you can fly like you got some kind of like magic rocket ship or something like that. And it seems like it's just easy to do, but it isn't. It isn't easy to do. The path wasn't straight, even though the animation makes it look that way. Now, why? Why is it confusing? Why is it difficult? Why is the path not straight? Well, because, yeah, life is confusing a lot of the time. And sometimes it isn't easy to find your way. You may be sitting there thinking, now, you know, maybe I want to grow up and do some kind of work in a high tech or in the arts, or be math or science or engineering. How do you get there, right? And it can be difficult to find your way. You know, and sometimes we get other examples from our life, like in games, right? Games have rules. Games like basketball. Right? You play basketball, if you do something wrong, right, the ref blows the whistle, right, and you stop, and everybody stops, and, you know, it's much more simple. You got guys like this, right? You know who these guys are, probably a lot of you, it's right, Steph Curry and LeBron James, right? They play their game, you know, and the great thing about playing games with rules is that you play the whole season, and at the end, man, somebody gets a trophy. They walk up to you and hand you a trophy. Congratulations, you won the game, right? And then a lot of times other people that kind of feel more like that, it's just, oh man, I didn't win the game, right? But you know, and it's very clear, somebody's going to get the trophy and be really happy, and the other guy is going to be kind of going, come on. And you got to wait till next year and all that. But okay, but it's much, much simpler a lot of times to play games than to live your life. Because in games, there are clear winners and losers. And most jobs aren't like that. Most projects aren't like that. It's often not clear if you're winning or losing. That's just the way it is. So what can you do? What can you do? Now, my first piece of advice when you're doing projects like this in STEAM is that you just keep trying. Did your projects work the first times? If you got your light lit, did it work the first time? Did it work the first time? It did? Good. How about for other people? Did it work the first time? No, it didn't, so you just have to keep trying. That is the way that it is. So now here is my story of how I started from pretty close to your age and all the things that I did between then and now that I'm standing up here in front of you. It's a bunch of different things. It's a bunch of different things. Starting in college. I studied history in college. Even though I grew up and worked at Apple and wrote software for my job, I didn't start writing software. I was more interested in things like this, about Greeks and Romans, what they did 2,000 years ago, and reading and studying about that, and looking at guys like this. I was not thinking about, right, high tech. I was thinking more about things that happened a long time ago, the past and not the future. Now, I did some programming in high school, but I used Hollerith cards. Now, you saw Hollerith cards downstairs. You saw the display of, these cards, right? What are these cards even for? I mean, it's part of how we had software before you could just plug in something and have a keyboard and type at the computer, right? This is how software was written. You needed to have cards, stacks and stacks and stacks of cards. Right? It's like, what is this even for? I mean, it seems so primitive to what we have now. But yeah, back when I was your age, I was doing programming still with Hollerith cards, and computers looked like that. They were room-sized. Of course, by the time I got to college, computers looked more like that. And these days, naturally, computers look more like this. It's a computer. We went from room-sized to personal computers to pocket computers. And when I was your age, I liked computers, but I didn't know what jobs I could do using computers. I simply didn't know. Again, I was confused a lot of the time. I didn't know what I could do when I grew up. So I tried different things after college. First thing I did was I went and fixed motorcycles. I got my history degree, and my next project was going and learning how to take engines apart and put them back together to fix motorcycles. A project. It was an idea. I did that for a little while, and then I got a job at a newspaper. I worked in the library helping the reporters research their stories. They could go look things up. We didn't have the internet back then as we do today. After that, I moved to Japan. I lived in Japan for over 2 years, and I taught English to Japanese people. I would meet these Japanese people, and we would speak English together so that they could learn how to do that. And while I was in Japan, I photographed. I went around with a camera, and I made pictures. And after that, I went to art school, put those pictures up on the wall, and talk about them. I was thinking maybe I could be a professor for photography. But then I discovered this, right? You know what that is. It's the World Wide Web. You use the web, right? You surf the internet, right? You go and you visit things, you look at videos and pictures and stuff. But back when I first saw the internet, it looked like this. There weren't really any pictures. It was just a little bit of text, and you'd click the blue links to go to other pages. It was primitive, but this was a great advantage because it looked simple enough for me to learn. So I tried to start learning about it. But I had no idea what I was doing. None at all. I was totally confused. But a little bit at a time, I started writing some HTML and started making some web pages. And that led to 7 years where I worked making web pages. But even that, I worked at 5 different companies. And none of them succeeded. 2 of those companies were my own, and they went out of business. They failed. And 3 others, well, one of them, I had a crazy boss who told me to come do one thing one day, and then the next day he came back and said, "What are you working on that for?" I said, "Well, because you told me to just yesterday." So I just quit that job. Again, there was a lot of, the path wasn't straight. It was confusing. But I just kept going. And year after year, I learned more about programming, and I learned from other people. Now, how many of you in your project, do you think your project that you were just doing, that it would be easier to do by yourself, or would it be easier to do with other people, have other people help you? It's always better to have other people help you. I learned a lot from other people. So I went from this, and eventually I met some people who helped me get a job at Apple. That's my badge. The picture they took of me and gave me a badge. Hey, you work at Apple now. It's quite a while ago. Maybe I look a little bit younger. I should. I was lucky to end up where I did. And this guy, Steve Jobs, who was running Apple, he was the CEO of Apple. He was in charge of Apple those days. He said, "Make me a web browser." So go and write a bunch of software so that Apple could have its own web browser. And again, I had no idea what I was doing. But I worked with other people, And we worked hard. And I spent a lot of time staring at a computer screen, writing code, trying to improve it a little bit at a time, spending a lot of time writing lines and lines of software. And 18 months later, we made Safari, which is the browser on the Mac, on Apple computers. After we were done with that, we did a good job. So he pointed at me again and a bunch of other people, and he said, make me a touchscreen phone. And so, again, I had no idea what I was doing. I had never made a web browser before I made a web browser, and I never made an iPhone before I made an iPhone. That's just what you had to do. I had no idea what I was doing. I worked with other people, and we worked hard. And we had made prototypes like this. Did you see this prototype downstairs? That was the prototype for the Palm Pilot. It's this crazy thing that they just made out of wood. And you get, like, I don't know, like a chopstick or something like that, and you cut it into a piece. We did that too with the iPhone. This was some of the prototype hardware that I worked with. It wasn't an iPhone, it was a prototype. It's kind of a blurry picture, I'm sorry. We didn't have a good smartphone camera because we were busy inventing the iPhone. So if you look in that one, you see on the left, you see that white piece of hardware. You can see it up at the top. It's in front of the computer, that little thing. All of that is an iPhone. Yeah, while we were making it. It's like you have the handset down there. Hello, hello. I mean, it's just like it didn't go through the hardware yet. So this kind of looks like your tables behind you, right? This is what it looked like at Apple when we were inventing the iPhone. Had all this hardware and all this wires and all this other junk laying around. But we were trying to get the pieces to work together. Now, eventually, a bunch of hardware people, experts, shrank all the pieces down and got them all in the same little space of that piece of prototype hardware. And 18 months later, we had all the software and hardware together. We made the iPhone. But just because this is what you know, right? That's where it starts. A cool project like that can start very much like with what you were doing today. Right? And my job was to make typing work. So now what does this mean for you? I told you a little bit about my story. What does this mean for you? I've got 6 quick ideas to share with you. Number 1, it should be clear by now, I've said it a number of times, is it's okay to be confused. It's okay not to know. It's okay to start a project that you've never done before and to be confused at it, especially when you start. That's okay, right? I was confused back when I was your age, worse than you, right? Second piece of advice is to try stuff. Try new stuff. I tried a lot of things as I was going along. I studied history, I did photography, I worked at a newspaper, I went to Japan, fixed motorcycles. I tried a bunch of different things. And that's good. It gives you experience at doing new things. I stopped working at Apple a little more than a year ago, and in that time I did a whole new project. I wrote a book. I never wrote a book before, and I was confused a lot of the time. But you know what? You sit down and you keep writing and you keep writing, and if you keep writing for enough days in a row, eventually you have a book. So number 3 is just that piece of advice again. Do projects. Do a lot of projects. Lots and lots of projects. A little bit less of this, less of that, and more doing projects like reading books and writing stories. Yeah, work with Raspberry Pi. Great. Get yourself a notebook and just draw some pictures in it. Things that maybe you'd like to make. Maybe you want to make a flying car. I don't know. Think about it. Imagine. Build things with Lego. Come to clubs in your school or your community, or come to days like this. You did it. You're here. Terrific. That's exactly right. I read Wikipedia just about every day. It's there on the internet for free. I go and read about things that I don't know about every day. It's one of my favorite things to do. I'm standing online in the supermarket, and then the line is long, and I want to pay for my groceries, but there are other people in front of me. I'll read Wikipedia. Little projects. They don't have to be big ones. They can be little projects. Now, right now, your job, you have a job. You may not think about it, but your job is school. You have a job. And you know what? Don't treat school like this. You know? It can sometimes be hard to pay attention when adults are standing in front of a room talking at you. I understand. But you know, your job is school right now. Pay attention the best you can. And my fifth piece of advice is that there are many different kinds of jobs in high tech. Different than the ones that you were doing in your project just before we sat down to talk together. Many, many different kinds of jobs. We often think that, like, you know, being a programmer is mostly what there is to do in high tech, but there isn't. There are lots of other jobs, lots and lots of other jobs. You can work in project management, help people stay organized in their projects. You can work in graphics. You can draw pictures on the computer like you saw with the teapot downstairs, right? You can do industrial design. You can design what the hardware will look like, whether it should use this kind of metal or that kind of metal, or this kind of glass or that kind of glass. Or, you know, I think maybe the adults in the room will laugh, you could become lawyers. Because if you're going to be a big company like the one I worked for, Apple, and sell products all over the world, yeah, you're going to need to follow a lot of laws in a lot of different countries. So there's lots of different jobs you can have in high tech, even if you don't like plugging wires into each other. Lots of different things that you can do and still be involved in some pretty cool new stuff. You know, because really, the future is yours. 20 years from now, or 25, or 30 years from now, you're going to be the one up here talking. Not me. I'm going to be old. It's going to be up to you to figure out what the future is. And you can do it. Right? Here's my pieces of advice. Do projects. It's all right to be confused. Try new stuff. Pay attention in school the best you can, and maybe learn a little bit about the kinds of jobs that there are in high tech. And don't worry if it seems confusing, because the path is not straight from where you are now to where you're going to wind up someday. Right? It's not straight, but the future is yours. Go. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, I'd be happy to take them. So we have a microphone coming behind you.
Can I get one of your books?
I don't know. Are there books downstairs? I don't know. I have one in my bag that I can show you. But I think there are books online. I don't know how many. I think I have maybe one copy in my bag that we can look at afterwards.
So you wrote the Autocorrect program?
Yes.
Oh. So are they still improving the code afterwards?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they are trying to improve it all the time.
What stories about Autocorrect have you heard of?
A lot of them. A lot of them. Well, just the other day, I was texting a friend, and we were talking about my car. And I've got a kind of an old car where you actually have to shift the car by hand. And I wanted to tell him how it was really clicky, how when you go, it goes kind of click, click, click when you shift the car. But the Autocorrect didn't know the word clicky, so it came out as clunky, which is different, right? The Autocorrect didn't know the word clicky, and it came out as clunky. And I had nobody to blame but myself, because I wrote the software. Yes, we have the mic coming.
What had your interest in everything you did, like go to Japan, work on Apple?
Yeah? So I'd say that again. So why am I interested in so many things?
No, what had your, yeah.
Yeah, why? Well, I'm interested in everything, all the time. I think being curious is one of the best things that you can be, to want to learn about new things. I was following you, some of you, going along with you before when we were taking the tour downstairs with all the old computers. And then you'd go on to the old thing, and I was still looking at the displays. And then I turn around, and you're gone, and I have to go catch up with you. Because I was curious about what these old things were. I remember some of those old things, so maybe that's a bit of a difference. But I can remember wanting a couple of those old computers that were for sale in the store and are now in the museum. But the thing is, to answer your question, I mean, to just be curious about things, to want to go places and do new things. Try new stuff all the time.
In your book, you said that working with Steve Jobs was, he was always very clear about what he wanted from you. Was he ever really harsh, like some people are saying?
Answer to that is yes. Now, I think one of the important lessons to learn in life is sometimes people aren't nice, but they can still be really smart and still be fun to work with. Sometimes when you're working on a project and you are confused and it's difficult, having someone come along and say, no, don't do it that way, do it this way instead, is maybe the best thing that you can have. And Steve Jobs could be pretty intimidating. He could be sometimes like a bully. Kind of seemed that way. But he was just very, very focused on trying to get the projects done on time. And Apple was a big company, and there were lots of people trying to cooperate all at once. And so having someone stand up at the front of the room say, everybody listen up, yeah, it works. Even if it's not 100% nice.
Why is the company named Apple?
Why is the company named Apple? I don't know. You know, I think they had the idea back when they started the company, back in the 1970s, that they were thinking of Isaac Newton and the apple falling from the apple tree and the discovery of gravity. And they just thought it was a good name. That's one of the things you have to do when you come up with a new company, is you have to think of the name for it. It's actually kind of a fun, exciting thing to do.
How many languages do you know how to speak?
Well, I can speak English, and I know a few words of Japanese. But Japanese is very difficult. Nihongo wa mukashii na, which is Japanese is difficult in Japanese. But now when it comes to computer languages, I can speak about a dozen of them. C and C++ and Objective-C and Swift and Perl and Python and Shell Script and Ruby and a couple more that I don't remember right now. But if you're going to want to learn how to use computers, boy, it really does help to learn a bunch of different languages. To try to, so that when new things come up, you're not confused. But, you know, it takes a lot of confusion and a lot of learning to get there. But try new stuff. Oh, there's a question in the back.
So, do you regret going the confusing path? Like, do you ever, if you could do it all over again, would you have chosen the path that you became a developer very early on? Like, if you could go back in time and say, hey, developer is a path to go, you should do that, and spur yourself on, as a youngster, or do you think it made you who you are today by having all that curiosity?
See, I don't think that there is a way to take shortcuts in life. I always look at it that you follow your nose. Just another way of saying is you do what makes sense right now. Because if you ask me what I'm going to be doing 10 years from now, I have no idea. I don't know. Now, I think that high technology is going to be changing a lot. It has changed. I mean, you go downstairs and you see these room-sized computers. And now we have computers in our pockets. That's because things change very, very fast. And so the projects that you are going to be working on when you graduate from college and go get a job haven't been invented yet. So there's no way that you could decide today that, oh, I'm going to be working on the new thing that is going to be brand new and cutting edge and exciting 10 years from now. You can't, because probably it hasn't been invented yet.
Did you ever get mad each time you couldn't figure out what?
Sure. Did I ever get mad? Yeah, of course. Of course. It's very frustrating to have a hard problem that you're trying to solve and not know how to solve it. Yes, of course. But you just keep going. I always thought it was a good idea that if I was confused, that I would stop. And particularly if it was the end of the day, I'd go to sleep. Maybe even go to sleep early. And you know what? While you're sleeping, if you really care about the problem, you'll be thinking about it while you sleep. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you can wake up and maybe not have the solution, but you can have an idea about what to do next.
Do you like to read?
I like to read. I love to read. I mean, reading books is one of the best hobbies you can have. Because when you read a book, you know what happens, right? If you read a story that you like, you can hear those other people's voices talking to you right in here. That's really cool when that happens. It's like, it's either real, fiction or nonfiction, stories that are made up, like Harry Potter. I loved reading Harry Potter when those books came out. And of course, they're still there for you. You can get into and take part, travel to another world. Because your imagination is really what's going to help you invent the future. Yes, lots of questions. I love this. This is great.
What's it called? Are you proud of yourself of what you've done?
I don't know. Most of the time, today is an exception, I don't think about the past quite so much. I'm mostly thinking about the future. What do I want to do today? It's like, what's for lunch? Right? And don't think so much about what I did last year or 5 years or 10 years ago. Because that's already done. Those problems are already solved.
So like in 10 years, if I want to work at Apple, could I have you recommend me or something?
I tell you, if you work hard for the next 10 years, yeah, send me an email or text me, sure. Because companies like Apple and Google and Facebook and it's all the big companies, they are looking for smart, talented, enthusiastic young people, of course, all the time. Yes.
All right, so Ken is going to be with us through lunch, so I definitely encourage you to keep asking these awesome questions and learning more about his history and what he's going to do in the future as well. And one last question to wrap things up. I know you shared a lot of great words of advice and wisdom with these students. And what is the final thing that you want to share with them to encourage them to continue to pursue their, future passions, whether they be in STEAM or, not necessarily the programming, but one of those other various things?
Keep trying. The path isn't straight. Don't worry if you're confused. That's how it is. So just keep trying. That is the best advice. If you're ever confused or worried or mad or frustrated, whatever, go to sleep, wake up the next day, and keep trying.